May 15th, 1996, Midwest City, Oklahoma. The night began like any other. 8-year-old Aubrey Whitlow blew out the candles on her birthday cake, kissed her mom goodnight, and curled beneath her pink quilt as streetlights painted soft shadows across her room. By morning, that room was empty. The window stood open, the curtain fluttering in the breeze, and on the sill, a single drop of blood glistened against white paint. Outside, her pajama bottoms lay tangled on the backyard fence. No sign of a struggle, no footprints, no sound in the night. Within hours, police cars filled Maple Drive. Neighbors searched ditches and fields, calling her name through tears. But it was as if the earth itself had swallowed Aubrey whole. Days turned to weeks, weeks into years, and in that small Oklahoma town, hope began to fade. Then, nearly 2 decades later, a single DNA test cracked the silence wide open, exposing a truth more horrifying than anyone could imagine. So what really happened to 8-year-old Aubrey Whitlow on that quiet spring night in 1996? And what secret was hiding just across the street, behind the smile of a trusted neighbor? Wherever you are watching from, what time is it where you are right now? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe every story deserves an ending, subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover the truth behind the cases the world tried to forget. May 15th, 1996, Midwest City, Oklahoma. The kind of night where even the air felt peaceful, cool, still, and expectant, as if nothing in the world could go wrong. 8-year-old Aubrey Whitlow was finishing up her birthday. Her laughter and the echoes of cake and candles still lingering in the house like the scent of vanilla frosting. She nestled under her pink quilt, the fabric soft against her chin, while her mother, Caroline, bent over her for the nightly ritual, a kiss on the forehead, a whispered goodnight, a gentle smoothing of butterfly-patterned curtains. Outside, streetlights glowed in soft amber halos, leaking through the window and painting shifting patterns across the little girl's room. Caroline stood in the doorway for a moment, her silhouette caught between light and shadow, watching Aubrey's small figure settle, her eyelids heavy but happy. She closed the door, a click in the quiet, and padded down the hall. The house exhaled. The world was silent except for the faint hum of a distant freight train and the low drone of a refrigerator. Peace hovered like a blessing. No one, least of all Caroline, could have sensed the darkness waiting just outside the window. No one heard the wind lift, fluttering the curtains in a sudden draft. No one noticed the sharp snap of a twig beneath the window, or the way the shadows seemed to grow denser along Maple Drive that night. The world, in its innocence, slept on. But the hour between midnight and dawn has always belonged to the unknown. That night, it was as if the very air held its breath. Sometime after midnight, while Caroline and her son Eli slept, something crept into the Whitlow home. Maybe it was just a whisper of a breeze at first, the soft hiss of air as the window was quietly pushed open. Maybe the only sound was the brush of bare feet on the carpet, the lightest scuff barely loud enough for a dreaming child to hear. Yet, in that fragile hour, Aubrey's world changed forever. By morning, the illusion of safety was shattered. The first light of dawn slipped across the neighborhood, making the world look the same as ever. Orderly lawns, tidy driveways, newspaper bundles thumping onto porches. But inside the Whitlow house, everything was wrong. Caroline rose early, as always, planning to make breakfast before school. She moved down the hallway, her steps ordinary, still half in the rhythm of daily life. She opened Aubrey's door, expecting to see her little girl curled up with her favorite stuffed rabbit, hair messy, breathing softly. Instead, the bed was empty. The pink quilt had been thrown aside, the sheet bunched on the floor. The window was wide open, curtain billowing in a breeze that suddenly felt too cold, too foreign. For a heartbeat, Caroline stood frozen, her mind refusing to process what her eyes saw. She staggered to the window, clutching the sill. There, right there, a faint, sticky stain glimmered dark red against the white paint. On the ground outside, something pale caught her eye. She ran out back, legs buckling, breath snatched away by terror. Aubrey's pajama bottoms, muddied and torn, lay tangled over the fence. No sound, no struggle, no little girl. In that instant, every parent's worst nightmare became Caroline's reality. Questions ricocheted through her mind. Had Aubrey wandered off? Was this some sick prank? But there was no note, no sign of her daughter. Nothing but a terrible silence and the sense of something unthinkable lurking just out of reach. By the time the sun was fully up, sirens broke the dawn. Police cars lined Maple Drive. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, faces pale, hearts pounding with fear and disbelief. Caroline, trembling, clutching a faded photograph of her smiling daughter, could barely speak. But one thing was horribly clear. Aubrey Whitlow had vanished from her bed without a trace. The nightmare had only just begun. And so, on a night that should have been safe and ordinary, a story began that would haunt an entire town and change lives forever. Aubrey Whitlow was a bright spot in the world. Her energy and imagination, like sunlight pouring into every room she entered. Her laughter was infectious, and her curious mind turned even the smallest moment into an adventure. At Traub Elementary School, teachers affectionately called her the sunshine of second grade, and her classmates followed her lead in games and stories at recess. Aubrey's favorite things were simple: sketching fanciful creatures in the margins of her notebooks, collecting colorful rocks, and inventing make-believe worlds for her stuffed animals. She was gentle with her younger brother, Eli, who idolized her and always wanted to tag along, even if it meant trailing behind her bike or quietly watching as she drew in her secret sketchbook. Home for the Whitlows was a modest white house on Maple Drive, the kind with a swing set in the backyard and a picket fence in front. Caroline, Aubrey's mother, worked as a nurse at the local clinic, balancing long shifts and single motherhood with an exhausted grace. She was fiercely protective, though always a little tired, and made sure her children knew they were loved, even when money was tight and the days were long. After Aubrey's disappearance, that house would come to symbolize everything lost, a place haunted by echoes and memories. Maple Drive was, by all accounts, a safe place, the sort of neighborhood where doors were rarely locked, and the greatest threat seemed to be the occasional stray dog or a teenager's rowdy party. On warm evenings, families gathered on their porches, sipping iced tea and trading stories, while children played tag under the lazy spin of porch lights. Neighbors waved as they mowed lawns or watered flowers, exchanging the kind of small talk that builds the illusion of safety. But in every neighborhood, secrets lurk behind closed curtains. Across the street from the Whitlows lived Darren Klein, a man who seemed to blend into the background, the kind of neighbor who was always there but never truly seen. At 38, Darren kept mostly to himself. He was a plumber by trade, known for helping the elderly with repairs and mowing lawns for those who couldn't. He wore the same faded baseball cap day after day, his posture slouched and movements quiet. Some said he was friendly enough, always quick with a polite nod, or an offer to help fix a broken fence. Yet there was something about the way his gray eyes watched the world that left some uneasy, though few would admit it aloud. Suspicion, after all, seemed out of place on Maple Drive. The night Aubrey disappeared, the neighborhood was wrapped in an eerie stillness. Nothing seemed out of place. The hum of streetlights and the distant chirp of crickets made everything feel ordinary. But behind that peaceful facade, a quiet menace had slipped into the heart of their world. No one heard the window being opened or the curtain torn in the dark. No neighbor's dog barked. No porch light flickered in warning. The silence was absolute, the darkness unchallenged. By morning, Maple Drive was transformed. News of Aubrey's disappearance spread from house to house in whispers and gasps, shattering the sense of safety that had held the community together for years. Parents clutched their children closer. Strangers suddenly felt like suspects. The police presence was immediate, the search desperate and frantic, but it was as if Aubrey had simply vanished into thin air. There were no witnesses, no obvious signs of a struggle. The faint bloodstain on the windowsill, the discarded pajamas, these were the only traces left behind. Neighbors gathered in small, anxious knots, replaying every detail of the night in their minds. Did they hear anything unusual? See a strange car? Was there a face they didn't recognize? Each came up empty, guilt gnawing at the edges of their recollections. For Caroline, the world had narrowed to a single, all-consuming question. Where was her little girl? What the community didn't realize, what they couldn't allow themselves to believe, was that the danger had never come from outside. It had been among them all along, hiding in plain sight, cloaked in the ordinary routines of a trusted neighbor. And as the days unfolded, the small town of Midwest City would learn just how fragile the boundaries of safety really were. By sunrise, the Whitlow house had become the center of a nightmare. Caroline's trembling hands had already dialed 911, her voice barely more than a broken whisper as she tried to explain what she'd found. The silence in Aubrey's room felt suffocating, pressing against her chest as she stared at the empty bed, the twisted sheets, the open window yawning toward the backyard. For a moment, she clung to hope. Maybe Aubrey had wandered outside. Maybe she'd be waiting with a sheepish grin beneath the old maple tree. But reality crept in, heavy and undeniable, with every second that passed. Police officers moved quickly, their radios crackling with urgency as they secured the scene. The scent of fresh coffee from a neighbor's porch clashed with the bitter metallic tang of fear. A yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze, snapping against the fence where Aubrey's pajama bottoms hung like a discarded flag of surrender. The sight of them, tangled in the wet grass and mud, sent a jolt of anguish through Caroline so sharp she nearly collapsed. Detectives stepped quietly through the backyard, searching for any sign, any clue that might explain the impossible. K9 units were brought in, their handlers kneeling to let the dogs sniff the damp earth. The dogs caught a scent. An invisible trail that led across the yard, through a thin strip of weeds, then through the empty lot that bordered the next block. The handlers called out, voices hopeful but strained, as the dogs led them across Adair Boulevard, 3 blocks away, where the trail faded to nothing in a patch of gravel and oil. No footprints, no drag marks, no sign of a struggle. It was as if Aubrey had been plucked from the world by some invisible force, leaving only heartbreak behind. Inside the house, officers dusted for fingerprints. They found partial prints on the window frame, smudged, incomplete, a ghostly echo of the hands that had opened it. There was a single drop of blood, tiny but sinister, glinting in the morning light. Tests would later confirm it didn't belong to anyone in the Whitlow family. To Caroline, those details meant little. She only wanted her daughter back. The neighborhood mobilized with the kind of frantic energy born of disbelief and dread. Volunteers combed the area, searching ditches, alleys, and drainage tunnels. Strangers formed search parties, moving through fields and wooded lots with flashlights and shouts. Every parent on Maple Drive kept their children indoors, eyes darting to every shadow, hearts pounding at every sound. As the day wore on, the investigation grew more desperate. Officers knocked on every door. Did anyone see a car parked strangely, hear a noise, notice a stranger? Most said no, their memories failing under the weight of shock and fear. A few recalled a faint metallic clang in the night, easily dismissed as a stray cat or a falling trash can. No one had seen Aubrey, or anyone taking her, or anything that could make sense of the void she'd left. Caroline was asked to retrace her steps again and again. Did she notice anyone watching? Was there anyone new in the neighborhood? Her mind spun with questions and guilt. Was there something she'd missed? Some sign that now, in hindsight, seemed obvious and damning. Days passed, but there were no new leads. The press arrived, cameras flashing as reporters clustered on the sidewalk, their voices solemn. "Another missing child," they intoned, as if it was simply a line in the day's news. But for Caroline, time had stopped. Every tick of the clock felt like a hammer blow. Inside Aubrey's room, the soft glow of the street light still filtered through butterfly curtains, illuminating the emptiness. The absence of a child's laughter, the untouched toys, the pillow still indented from her small head. These became the evidence of a life interrupted, a joy stolen. Midwest City, once a place of ordinary comforts, was now a town with a secret wound, invisible but aching, as neighbors whispered and worried and locked their doors against a terror they could not name. And for the Whitlow family, nothing would ever be ordinary again. The news spread through Midwest City like wildfire. One child gone, no answers, no clues. By noon that day, every resident on Maple Drive knew Aubrey Whitlow's name, and by evening, the entire town was gripped by fear. The rhythmic pulse of everyday life collapsed into anxious whispers and frantic activity. Police cruisers lined the street, their lights swirling red and blue across front lawns that had always seemed so safe. Reporters hovered with microphones, the word "missing" repeated over and over until it felt like a curse settling on every doorstep. Neighbors who'd waved from porches just the day before now gathered in tight circles, eyes red-rimmed with worry and sleeplessness. People searched the alleys and culverts, calling Aubrey's name with a desperation that clawed at their throats. Church groups and scout troops organized search parties. Fathers and teenagers waded through ditches and wooded lots, forming human chains to scour every inch of ground. Strangers who had never spoken before walked side by side through fields and drainage tunnels, united by a single hope and a single shattering fear. Flyers multiplied overnight, plastered on every utility pole, taped to every grocery store window and gas station door. The image was always the same: a little girl with bright eyes and a crooked smile, her hair tied in pigtails, the words "Missing, Aubrey Whitlow, age 8, printed in bold black letters beneath her picture. Caroline's hands shook as she pressed one of those flyers onto a lamppost, her fingers numb in the cool dusk. People who had only seen her as a neighbor now recognized the raw anguish in her face, the terrible vulnerability of a mother whose child was lost to the night. The Whitlow house became a focal point for the community's anxiety and hope. Plates of food arrived on the porch, casseroles, sandwiches, cookies no one could eat. Offers of help poured in, but there was so little to do except wait and hope and pray. Caroline barely slept, clutching her daughter's photograph, her voice trembling as she pleaded on local television. "If someone has my little girl, please just bring her home." Her words echoed across living rooms and lingered in the air like the scent of grief. For days, no one in the neighborhood slept. Parents held their children close, refusing to let them out of sight. School buses drove emptier routes, and teachers tried to answer impossible questions with gentle reassurances and trembling smiles. Porch lights burned through the night, casting long shadows across lawns where laughter had once been the only sound after sunset. The sense of community that had always defined Maple Drive warped under the strain, suspicion seeping in where trust had once lived. People eyed their neighbors warily, questioning every unfamiliar car and every face they couldn't immediately place. As the hours turned into days, hope grew thin. The search parties thinned out, and the energy of the first frantic hours dissolved into exhaustion. Police officers followed up every tip, interviewed every possible witness, but no one had seen or heard a thing that made sense. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed Aubrey whole, leaving nothing but an ache that pulsed beneath the surface of daily life. In whispered conversations behind closed doors, a single chilling thought grew louder. What if the person who took Aubrey lived among them? What if evil wore the face of the ordinary, slipping through the world unnoticed? Fear settled over the town like a heavy fog, clouding judgment and eroding the simple kindnesses that had once bound the community together. And in the Whitlow house, night after night, Caroline left the porch light on and the window cracked, as if somehow Aubrey would find her way back home. The hope was fragile, nearly gone, but not yet extinguished. For as long as a single light burned in the darkness, the town of Midwest City held on, desperate for a miracle that refused to come. In the days that followed Aubrey's disappearance, the investigation consumed every waking moment for the Midwest City Police Department. Detectives built a meticulous timeline, examining every minute of that fateful night. Caroline had tucked her daughter in at 10:30 p.m., a detail she recounted over and over. The memory burned into her mind like a scar. Just after 11, a neighbor reported hearing a faint metallic sound outside but thought nothing of it, dismissing it as the noise of a stray cat or a falling tool in someone's yard. By the time the sun rose, Aubrey was gone, and the evidence left behind was scant and puzzling. There were no obvious signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no splintered wood. Just that open window, the torn curtain, and a chilling drop of blood on the frame. Partial fingerprints, smudged, partial, elusive, were lifted from the sill, but none provided an immediate match. The blood, tested quickly, did not belong to anyone living in the house. Every minor detail was logged, photographed, and analyzed, but the truth remained stubbornly out of reach. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on every door, probing for even the smallest clue. Each resident recounted their version of the night, what they'd seen, what they'd heard, if anything at all felt unusual. Many remembered nothing. Some admitted to sleeping through the night entirely, while others recalled a restless feeling, the kind of unease that only makes sense in hindsight. When officers reached Darren Klein across the street, he answered the door with his usual quiet, almost indifferent demeanor. He claimed he had been asleep all night and hadn't heard or seen anything suspicious. His manner was calm, bordering on flat, and he expressed polite concern for Caroline and her family. To most, Darren seemed as unremarkable as ever, just another neighbor sharing in the town's worry. Yet, in the following days, something about Darren's behavior unsettled the detectives. 2 days after the disappearance, he replaced the entire wooden fence behind his yard, working quickly and methodically. When asked, he explained it had been rotting for months and the timing was simply coincidence. But the abruptness of the repair, coupled with his proximity to the Whitlow house, raised eyebrows. The police searched his property, but found nothing directly tying him to the crime. With no evidence, no witnesses, no confession, their suspicions had nowhere to settle. The pressure on law enforcement mounted with every day that passed without answers. Reporters crowded the steps of the police station. The public demanded action. Volunteers grew frustrated and frightened. For Caroline, the waiting was its own special torture. She oscillated between hope and despair, haunted by memories of Aubrey's voice and laughter, and by nightmares that jolted her awake each night. Despite their efforts, weeks melted into months. The initial urgency gave way to exhaustion. New cases arrived, and although detectives promised Caroline they would never stop searching, the world moved on. Aubrey's photo, her gap-toothed smile, her bright eyes, faded from the front page and from the walls of the police station. The missing posters grew weathered, their edges curling in the Oklahoma sun. The tips and leads dried up. Doors that once opened in support now closed in fear. For the town, the loss became a shadow stretching over every ordinary day. Children were no longer allowed to play unsupervised, and neighbors greeted one another with suspicion instead of warmth. Maple Drive, once a place of comfort, was transformed by fear and uncertainty. And for Caroline, the weight of not knowing became almost unbearable. She kept Aubrey's room untouched, her daughter's belongings preserved as if she might return at any moment. Every phone call jolted her heart. Every knock on the door set her nerves aflame. She watched the seasons change outside the window, the leaves turning, the snow falling, and wondered if she'd ever learn the truth of what happened on that quiet night. The hope that once burned bright in her chest began to flicker, threatened by the darkness that had settled over her world. Time, once marked by daily routines and little milestones, became something else entirely for the Whitlow family. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into years. The world outside changed, but inside the Whitlow house on Maple Drive, everything remained suspended in the moment Aubrey vanished. Her pink bedroom, once alive with laughter and dreams, stayed frozen, a shrine to hope and memory. Stuffed animals sat arranged on the bed, school books lined the shelves, and a photograph of Aubrey with her gap-toothed grin remained on the dresser, gathering dust but never losing its power to pierce Caroline's heart. Caroline herself moved through each day as if underwater, her actions dulled and slowed by the weight of grief. She kept working at the clinic, tending to other people's children, forcing herself to smile through their cuts and colds, all the while haunted by the question that never left her. Where was her daughter? She kept Aubrey's favorite birthday candle, marked with a bright 9 on the nightstand, a silent testament to a future that never came. Holidays passed with hollow rituals, an extra stocking hung at Christmas, an untouched piece of cake set aside in May. The ache of absence became a constant companion, as familiar as her own shadow. The case itself haunted Midwest City, lingering like an unhealed wound. Every year on May 15th, the local news replayed Aubrey's story. Her face flickered across television screens and newspapers, the girl who vanished from her bed. For a few days, old pain flared, neighbors exchanged worried glances, and fresh posters appeared on telephone poles. Yet, as each anniversary faded, so did the attention. New tragedies replaced the old. The world, relentless and uncaring, moved forward. For the detectives who had first searched Maple Drive, the Whitlow case became a measure of regret. It was a file that sat near the top of the cold case stack, a reminder of failure, of a mystery unsolved. Young officers, new to the force, were told the story their first week on the job, a cautionary tale about how evil could lurk behind even the friendliest facade. Some detectives retired with Aubrey's face etched into their memory, still replaying the timeline in their minds, still wondering what they had missed. Years drifted by. Caroline grew older, her hair streaked with silver, her son Eli growing into adolescence and then adulthood beneath the heavy cloud of loss. Friends and neighbors offered support, but most eventually slipped away, unable to bear the constant reminder of a wound that would never heal. The once close community of Maple Drive became quieter, more private. New families moved in, barely aware of the shadow that lingered in the old white house on the corner. It wasn't until 2014, nearly 2 decades after Aubrey's disappearance, that hope stirred again. Advances in forensic technology had changed the world of law enforcement, and the Midwest City Police Department formed a new cold case task force. Detective Miles Cordero, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for stubborn persistence, took a particular interest in the Whitlow case. He pulled out the battered box of evidence from 1996, old case files, faded photographs, a few plastic bags containing DNA swabs and scraps of fabric. He was struck by the sense of time preserved, tragedy bottled and sealed away for years. Determined not to let the case fade into obscurity, Detective Cordero sent the original DNA evidence, blood from the window frame, partial fingerprints, for reanalysis at a modern crime lab. The wait was agonizing, as weeks stretched into months, but for the first time in years, there was a glimmer of possibility. Caroline, after years of dashed hopes and false leads, barely dared to believe. She kept her routine, kept Aubrey's room untouched, but every night she found herself staring at the phone, praying for news. No one in Midwest City could have imagined that after all this time, the truth might finally come to light. Yet beneath the silence of years, secrets were waiting to be uncovered, proof that no crime, no matter how deeply buried, can stay hidden forever. When the DNA results finally arrived, everything changed. Detective Miles Cordero sat in his cramped office, the cold case file open before him, as he read the lab report again and again, scarcely able to believe what he was seeing. The blood sample taken from the Whitlow window frame nearly 20 years ago, one of the few physical clues in the case, had been run through the newest DNA databases. The match was undeniable, and it sent a cold shiver down his spine. The DNA belonged to Darren Klein, the Whitlow's neighbor across the street. The man who'd been interviewed all those years ago. The man whose quiet presence had faded into the background of every memory, every street view, every neighborhood gathering. It was a revelation that upended the fragile peace of Maple Drive. Detective Cordero, moving swiftly, obtained a search warrant for Darren's home. This time there would be no overlooked evidence, no easy explanations. Officers combed through the house, every drawer, every crevice, the air heavy with the sense that they were about to disturb something unspeakable. Down in the basement, behind boxes of old tools and musty Christmas decorations, they found a small, battered wooden box. The box itself was unremarkable, just a plain, time-worn container. But inside, the truth waited in the form of small, chilling relics. A pink ribbon of hair, faded and brittle, a single child's button, and an old, yellowed newspaper clipping about Aubrey's disappearance, folded and refolded until the edges tore. As the detectives opened the box, the smell of damp wood and something far older drifted out, sharp and sickly sweet, sending a wave of dread through everyone in the room. It was an intimate archive of horror, a private shrine to a secret kept for nearly 2 decades. With this evidence, the case against Darren Klein grew overwhelming. The neighborhood was rocked by shock and disbelief. How could the man who fixed fences for the elderly, who waved politely at Caroline for 18 years, have harbored such darkness? The sense of betrayal ran deep, poisoning old memories and conversations. Parents who had once trusted him with spare keys to their homes now recoiled in horror, struggling to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster hiding in plain sight. The arrest was swift. Darren Klein was taken into custody in October 2015, charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder. He said nothing, offered no confession, and his gray eyes revealed nothing but a flat, unsettling calm. For Caroline, the news brought a tidal wave of emotions, relief that someone would finally answer for what happened to her daughter, pain at the realization that the man responsible had watched her grieve from across the street, and a hollow ache that no punishment could ever truly make things right. Though the discovery brought the investigation to a dramatic turning point, the central agony remained unresolved. Aubrey's remains were never found. There was no closure, no grave to visit, no final certainty. The pink ribbon, the button, the blood, these fragments had to stand in for a lifetime lost. The trial would soon begin, and the entire town braced for the storm of revelations and heartbreak to come. Yet the story of Aubrey Whitlow, for so long an echo in the halls of Maple Drive, was no longer a cold case, no longer just a photograph on a fading flyer. The truth, long buried beneath routine and trust, had finally clawed its way to the surface, forever changing the lives of everyone touched by that quiet, ordinary street. And as the police cars drove away with Darren Klein in handcuffs, neighbors watched from behind their curtains, some weeping, some shaking, all forever changed by the knowledge of what evil can look like when it wears the mask of the familiar. The trial of Darren Klein became a spectacle that gripped not just Midwest City, but much of Oklahoma. News vans parked along Maple Drive, their satellite dishes bristling like strange new trees, as reporters jostled for interviews and sound bites. Families who once gathered for block parties now kept their windows shuttered, avoiding both the cameras and each other's gaze. Parents held their children's hands tighter, flinching at every unfamiliar face, every creak of a floorboard in the night. The entire neighborhood felt as if it were holding its breath, desperate for answers, yet terrified of what those answers would reveal. Inside the courthouse, the proceedings were almost surreal. Darren Klein, always so quiet and ordinary, sat stone-faced and unmoving as the charges were read aloud: kidnapping, first-degree murder, and a litany of lesser crimes. He did not speak. He offered no apology, no confession, no explanation. His attorney argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the passage of time had clouded facts and memory. But the DNA, the items in the basement, the timeline, all of it painted a damning picture. Witness after witness described the trust they'd placed in Darren, the kindnesses he'd shown, and the deep sense of betrayal that now gnawed at them. Carolyn sat through every day of the trial, her hands twisting in her lap, her face hollowed by years of sleepless nights. Eli, now a young man, accompanied her, both mother and son tethered to hope and heartbreak. The prosecution laid out the case in painful detail, reconstructing the events of that night, showing the jury the photographs, the blood-stained windowsill, the pink ribbon, and the button. Each piece of evidence was a dagger, reopening wounds that had never truly healed. But the most excruciating absence was Aubrey herself. With no body, no definitive answer to where her remains had been hidden, there could be no complete closure, only a verdict. In the end, the jury found Darren Klein guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole, his fate sealed by science and sorrow. He never confessed, never told the truth of what he'd done or where he'd hidden Aubrey. The courtroom's silence after the sentence was less a victory than a release. A long-held breath finally let go, only to be replaced by the ache of unfinished mourning. 3 years later, news reached Midwest City that Darren Klein had died in prison. The official statement was terse. No foul play suspected, no further details. For some, the news was a small comfort. For others, it was an abrupt, unsatisfying end. The one person who truly knew what had happened to Aubrey had taken the secret to his grave. Carolyn heard the news and wept quietly, Eli's arm around her shoulders. "He's gone, but my little girl still hasn't come home," she whispered, the words hanging heavy in the silent kitchen. Even so, life on Maple Drive had to go on. Children grew up, houses changed hands, the rhythm of ordinary life slowly reasserted itself. But every year, on the night of May 15th, a small crowd gathered in front of the old Whitlow house. Neighbors, some who had lived through it, some who only knew the story by reputation, lit candles beneath the window where Aubrey had disappeared. The chipped paint and cracked glass bore silent witness, a haunting reminder that some stories never truly end. The house itself became a kind of memorial, a lesson passed on to each new family that moved in. Lock your doors, watch your neighbors, trust with caution. Yet, even as the memory of Aubrey faded from the headlines, she remained alive in the hearts of those who refused to forget. Every flickering candle was a promise, however fragile, that evil would not have the final word, and that someday, perhaps, the unfinished truth might finally come to light. Behind every haunting story is a seed of truth, and the tale of Aubrey Whitlow's disappearance was no exception. While her name belonged to fiction, the heartbreak and horror woven through her story came from a very real place, a tragedy that began in the quiet heart of Midwest City, Oklahoma, almost 3 decades earlier. In May 1997, the community was stunned by the disappearance of 8-year-old Kirsten Renee Hatfield. Like Aubrey, Kirsten was taken from her bedroom in the dead of night. Her mother awoke to an open window, a torn curtain, and the chilling absence of her child. Panic swept through the neighborhood. Friends, family, and strangers joined police in a desperate search, combing fields and creeks, hanging flyers, clinging to hope that Kirsten would be found safe and returned home. But hope quickly gave way to grim reality. Days turned into weeks with no sign of the missing girl. Suspicion and dread festered beneath the surface of everyday life, infecting even the simplest acts. A glance at a neighbor, the sound of a car door late at night. The Hatfield investigation followed the same early beats as Aubrey's story. Detectives scoured the scene for evidence. A bloodstain was found on the window frame, and partial fingerprints lingered, taunting investigators with the possibility of answers just out of reach. In those first frantic days, suspicion flickered in every direction, but there was never enough to make an arrest. The case eventually went cold, becoming a painful echo in the background of Midwest City's collective memory. For Kirsten's mother, each day was a battle against despair, her daughter's room preserved in an act of hope that teetered between faith and heartbreak. Time passed. Life moved on for most, but not for those closest to Kirsten. Her name was whispered on anniversaries, her photo posted on bulletin boards and news reports, a small face lost in the tide of other tragedies. Yet even as years rolled by, detectives kept a box of evidence on a shelf, refusing to let the case fade completely. For nearly 18 years, the truth hid in plain sight, just beyond the reach of closure or justice. It wasn't until 2015 that technology finally caught up with tragedy. Advances in forensic science allowed investigators to re-examine the original DNA evidence from the Hatfield scene. The results were shocking, not just for the police but for an entire neighborhood. The DNA from the window matched Anthony Joseph Palma, a neighbor who lived only 2 doors away from the Hatfields. Like Darren Klein in the fictional account, Palma was an unassuming man, known for odd jobs and polite greetings, never drawing suspicion. When confronted, he denied everything, but the evidence told a different story. In his possession, police found unsettling keepsakes, a lock of hair, a button, and news clippings about the case. Though Kirsten's body was never found, the circumstantial evidence and DNA were enough to convict Palma, who was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The real ending was as haunting as fiction. Palma, like Klein, died behind bars in 2019, never revealing the location of Kirsten's remains. The community mourned again, left with only the faint comfort of knowing her abductor could never hurt another child. But for those who loved her, the story would never have a true ending. There would always be an empty place at the table, an untouched bedroom, a birthday celebrated in silence. In telling Aubrey's story, the echo of Kirsten's tragedy remains, a stark reminder that monsters can hide behind friendly faces and that sometimes the truth emerges only after years of darkness. These stories, whether real or imagined, urge us to remember, to remain vigilant, and to honor the lost by refusing to let their memories fade. Some wounds never heal, some questions are never answered. But through remembrance and the pursuit of justice, their voices still speak, reminding us that even in darkness, we must never stop searching for the light. Decades have passed since the night innocence vanished from a quiet home in Midwest City. The world has changed in ways both small and vast. New houses now stand on old foundations. Children play with phones instead of chalk, and the rhythms of everyday life thrum steadily on. But the memory of a missing child, whether named Aubrey Whitlow or Kirsten Hatfield, endures with a quiet gravity. Their stories became woven into the fabric of a town and a community that still, after so many years, refuses to forget. On each anniversary of the disappearance, the Whitlow house, like the real Hatfield home, draws neighbors, friends, and strangers who never knew the family except through news reports or whispered stories. Candles flicker on the windowsill, their flames reflected in the cracked glass, casting trembling shadows on the walls inside. Some bring flowers, others leave notes, and every year, Caroline, or someone just like her, stands at the door, the weight of memory pressing on her shoulders. These vigils are both a remembrance and a call for vigilance. They are reminders that the wounds of the past can echo through generations, and that the cost of forgetting is far too great. For those who lived through the tragedy, the pain evolves but never disappears. Caroline's life became a quiet campaign for justice, a voice for the missing and the vulnerable. Her grief transformed into a plea for awareness and action. She spoke at local schools, warning children never to take their safety for granted and urging parents to watch, listen, and trust their instincts. Her message was simple but urgent. Evil often wears an ordinary face, and it is everyone's responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The community, too, changed in ways both visible and unseen. Locks and security cameras became as common as welcome mats, and neighbors who once took comfort in routine learned to question the familiar. Yet the lessons of Aubrey's story went deeper than fear. They fostered empathy, resilience, and a renewed commitment to looking out for one another. People learned to check in on their friends, to report what felt wrong, to reach out when someone was hurting. These small acts of connection became bulwarks against the darkness. The name Kirsten Hatfield still lingers in the collective consciousness of Midwest City, a symbol of lost innocence and unfinished stories. She should have grown up, gone to school dances, graduated, fallen in love, and started a family of her own. Instead, her life became a lesson, a reminder that even in a world full of danger, hope, and determination can endure. For every missing child, every unanswered question, there is a chorus of voices that refuses to let their stories fade into silence. Tonight, as the candles burn in front of the old Whitlow house, a new generation gathers to remember and to promise. We will not look away. We will pay attention to the windows left open, the children walking alone, the neighbor whose smile doesn't quite reach his eyes. We will speak up, even when our voices tremble, because sometimes a single word can be enough to save a life. So as the flames flicker in the darkness, let them be more than a memorial. Let them be a call to action. Share these stories. Keep the memories alive. Be the voice that breaks the silence, the light that guides the lost home. Because the world is not made safer by fear, but by courage. The courage to care, to speak, and to never, ever forget. And as you finish listening, remember, one voice, one story can make all the difference. Turn on your porch light, check on your neighbors, and hold your loved ones close. Share what you've learned. Let every ending become a beginning of vigilance, compassion, and the unending pursuit of truth and justice.